Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Sorry we're running a little bit behind. First thing on the work session is the preliminary agenda review. As always, stop me if you got questions. Call to order, invocation, pledge of the flag, and announcements. Meeting schedules in March. March 3rd is the State of the City at 7 a.m. Where are we at on an evening?
Have an evening one, Donna, we got one, right? So we have Bridge of Life that is available if you want to do a evening one.
So we're working on that, okay. All right. Then a work session at 4. March 10th is a work session at 4. The 17th is a work session at 4. The 24th is a regular session at 7 p.m. And on March 31st, we're giving the council off. You're welcome.
When are we off?
We'll have appointments for the Board of Traffic and Parking. We'll have agenda item citizen comments. There'll be a public hearing on comprehensive rezoning. We'll adopt the minutes of January the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th. Under the consent agenda, under the fire department, we have thermal camera kits. Whitmer Public Safety Group out of Williamsport, Maryland for $13,195. The Department of Parks and Engineering, have a demolition of 319 Summit Avenue, Allegheny Wrecking and Salvage, Hagerstown, Maryland for $18,700. Under Parks, the purchase of a vehicle to replace number 331 from Criswell Chevrolet, Inc. in Gaithersburg, Maryland for $32,822. And under Parks, remove of additional trees at City Park, All Reliable Services, Inc., St. Augustine, Florida, for $30,000. Under the Police Department, we have tasers and equipment, Axon out of Scottsdale, Arizona, for $14,612.50. Under Utilities Department, we have water, large meter valves, and spool pieces, Core and Main, Martinsburg, West Virginia, $182,973.08. Underwater, we have the annual service contract, Hack Company, Loveland, Colorado, $12,332. On the wastewater, the 2019 BOMAG dual drum asphalt roller from James River Equipment, Stevenson, Virginia, for $17,747. Under wastewater, we have a 2020 Ford F-250 4x4 Super Duty Super Cab from Keystone Ford out of Chambersburg for $40,373. And under wastewater, retrofit grinder pump kits, Fluid Solutions, Inc., Westminster, Maryland, $24,490. Unfinished business, we have the approval of an ordinance acceptance of a donation of real property at Greens at Hamilton Run. On a new business, introduction of an ordinance, land management code amendments, introduction of an ordinance, sale of 117 South Locust Street, introduction of an ordinance, sale of 36 to 40 North Potomac Street, the approval of designating alley number 2-7 as Argus Lane, the approval of city-county agreement for North Point, the approval of a road improvement agreement with North Point, the approval of lease for Elizabeth Hager Center, and the approval of an open container exemptions for Visit Hagerstown CBB, Hagerstown Hopes Pride, and August-Toberfest. Then we'll have general citizen comments, and then the city administrator's comments, mayor council comments, and then we'll adjourn. Sounds like it ought to be pretty fast. Any questions?
No.
Okay, I like that. All right. North Point Development, Basil Boulevard roadway improvements, Jill. And Rodney and Jason and Brett. Good to see you again.
Hi.
Go Chiefs.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring it up, but
That's okay, buddy. Yeah, I was all in.
you know what? Once you win the MVP, then the next year you win the Super Bowl. So
That's the way it's supposed to
Ravens
work.
should win it
Right.
next
There you
year.
go.
Yes.
All right.
So we're here tonight to talk about the North Point Development Project on Basil Boulevard. It's been since December since our audience at home has heard about this project, so we wanted to first let Brent, who serves as Chief Marketing Officer and a founding partner for North Point, give an overview of the company and a quick update on the project. And then Rodney's gonna talk a little bit about the need for the reconstruction of Basil Boulevard. And then I'll walk you through the agreements that are included in your packet and are on the agenda for approval for next week. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brent.
Yep, good afternoon, everyone. Again, Brent Miles with North Point Development. I think many of you are familiar with me and our firm, but for those watching at home, get a little bit of a brief presentation. We're based in Kansas City. As many of you know, we own about 75 million square feet of industrial space throughout the country, which makes us one of the 2 largest privately held landlords in the U.S. We are proud to say that we're a large landlord of companies like Ford and General Motors and Chewy.com and Adidas and Patagonia and you name it, Caterpillar. If it's bought or sold in this country, there's a chance that it's in one of our warehouses somewhere in the 22 states that we are in from coast to coast. I've been asked several times, why here? And we have developed all along the 81 corridor in Pennsylvania. I would say that I think there's been a sea change from the county perspective, the city perspective, the state perspective in terms of getting movement and getting capital investment and creating jobs in this community. You should be proud of that. Your logistics are great. Your labor is strong. You have a site that works really well for what we like to construct. It fits really well. And those are all 3 things that are data-driven. There's a 4th thing that I want you to hear specifically, which was your attitude. Everybody that we've met that's worked on this project, from the city, county, state, you name it, they've had a great can-do attitude. And that's easy to say. It doesn't happen in a lot of places. And I commend you for the leadership. I commend the staff of all those entities who we've interacted with. I jokingly said, I at first thought maybe there were just a couple good apples at the top, but I've been through multiple barrels of apples and I can't find a bad one yet. And everybody that we've interacted with has just been really great from a technical side, like with Rodney and obviously Jill with her leadership, but just even like the attorney, our interaction with your attorney and our attorney. It wasn't combative. We said, we're partners. Here's what is hard for us. Here's what works for us. Here's what's hard for us. Here's what works for us. And we did that in a very quick manner because we had respect for each other. And respect goes a long way. So I commend you for that. It's important to remember when you interact with businesses. We could put this $135 million project and this capital lots of different places. We'd like to put it here. You've welcomed us, and we're going to put it here. So thank you. So again, about a $140 million project. It consists of 4 buildings. We'll build 2, get them essentially partially leased, have good momentum, and then we'll pull the trigger on the next 2. People always said, well, who are we going to get? I don't know. Given the size of these, for the big buildings in particular, you're probably talking a Fortune 500, probably a Fortune 100, just because of the size. The smaller buildings, you may see some of the big names, but those are probably going to be more localized or regionalized. People that do business here in your town already, who is growing, needs a new spot, or consolidating, or maybe 50 miles up the road and says, I'm tired of being there, I want to move, because you have strong labor, logistics, business-friendly environment, right? I think one thing that, if I were in your seats, would be important to me, not just the capital investment, but I think this will be at least 1,500 new jobs to your community. And will you get an influx of people moving here? Yes, some. But what you have right now, if you haven't looked at the stats, is you have an out-migration. You have people that live here every day who go some other place to work. And if they can work here, why not? And again, not to get into the social aspects, but if they're not spending their money on gas and in the car for 45 minutes for a job, and they're here and they can spend more time with their family, participate in the community, in schools, there is a unquantifiable effect in the community of what that does. And we've seen that throughout Pennsylvania where we've been and developed. Obviously, it's just a big project. These are big buildings. This is a big project. No matter where I go in the country, this would be a $140 million project with 1,500 jobs is going to get attention. We've had, again, great interaction with your staff. But of course, I'll tee it up for Rodney. We ran into an issue, and that issue is Basil Boulevard. And he can talk about the history of that. All I'd say is that, we found a problem, but again, respectfully worked through it. And I hope that you recognize that we didn't say, well, that's your problem because it wasn't built right back in 1982 or 83. We never had that. Those words never came out of our mouth, nor did we ever think that. We said, here's $1.8 million of our funds to help you if you can find other sources to do that. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over back to Rodney and Jill. I don't know if that's the end of the slides there. Okay. And they can talk a little bit more about that, how we accomplished that goal, and the details of the agreement itself.
Well, anytime there's a development that happens, especially one of this size, there's a traffic impact study that's done. And typically, what that impact study shows is that you need to add turn lanes here, change this intersection. But what we realized when we reviewed the traffic study for this project is that the amount of traffic that's going to be on Basil Boulevard after that is fully occupied, the pavement itself is inadequate to handle that. Basically, the road was built in the 1980s, and the amount of traffic that'll be on here after these buildings are built will be twice the level that was anticipated when the road was built. And
we've been heading in. But there is a little bit of a transition period here where I guess we would like some guidance from the council. Last April 2019, that's about the time every year when we send out curb and sidewalk notices for the following year. So we sent out approximately 100 to 110 notices last April. They are due, that work is due to be completed by June 1st of this year. So those notices have already gone out. The people had those notices, and some of those people, a small percentage of those people have already done their curb and sidewalk repairs. So going forward, we need to decide how we're going to handle those outstanding notices that are out there. We can leave them in place and just say to those property owners, you have until June 1st to complete the work, just like everybody else that got a notice. Or we could say, knowing that this change is coming in the stormwater program and that the city by July 1st is going to be taking over curb and sidewalks, we could rescind the notices that are out there. So anybody that hasn't done the work yet, say, you got lucky, the city's going to take that over, you don't need to do anything.
It's going to be unfair no matter how we do it. But I gotta tell you, I'll be the one getting the knocks on the doors because I'm lucky enough to have my street being resurfaced this year. And those familiar with my neighborhood know we have a couple large corner lots with a large amount of sidewalk. And I see one of my neighbors right now having one of those large corner lots totally torn up with sidewalks being replaced. And it seems to me we gotta do one of two things. Either we take care of reimbursing those people for what they've spent this year, or we wait till next year. But to think that people are doing what we sent them notices saying they should do, and saying, well, you're the unlucky ones, and the people that haven't done anything yet, you're the lucky ones, I have a problem with that. I don't know how many sidewalk reimbursements we would be responsible for. I think that's a much more intelligent way to look at it right now, to find out whether that's something that, this is what it's gonna cost us to do all, and this is what it's gonna cost us to do the reimbursement and see what the difference is. And also, I'm assuming then we would go ahead and make sure these are all done prior to the overlays.
We would. I think that knowing that this transition was coming, I think we're sort of delaying the overlay schedule. We may wait until fall or maybe even next spring to do the paving, just to make sure we have time
I
to.
understand, but I would like us to find out what it would cost to reimburse those people that are right now are doing what we told them they had to do instead of, I have issues.
How far back?
Well, I would say to this notice, to the
Just the
notice,
set of
yeah,
notices.
to the set of
I think it's
notices.
about, I think it's between 15 and 20 have done their repairs.
Ronnie, what's the, and I know that Jim looked at this number, I don't know, back in '08, I think, when we had an initial conversation about taking over sidewalk maintenance, but what is, during these overlays, what is the average amount spent on sidewalk improvements, from notices that we send out? What do you think that number is?
I think what we've been talking about in the modeling for the stormwater program is, I mean, it varies every year depending on what streets you're doing, but we sort of figured that it's about $100,000 in curb and $100,000 in sidewalk every year.
So I would say $2,000 might be the average.
Yeah,
But
I've
I've
noticed
seen
it's
people
out
get
there.
ones that wound up being over 10,000.
Oh, that would be what I'm looking at,
Right.
these neighbors who have these big, huge corner lots. And by the way, just as a positive, I was, speaking to the realtor this weekend who was showing a house in my neighborhood. And she's never sold a house in the city. So I got to answer the questions about advantages, disadvantages. One of the very interesting questions was she looked at the sidewalk and said, is the new purchaser gonna have to pay for the sidewalk repair? And that's a pretty expensive proposition, isn't it? So once we do this, and it made it clear again to me that we, as much as they say they've done it, that we still need a lot more outreach to realtors. Had very, very little knowledge, if any, about what type of advantage there might be living in the city of Hagerstown at all. Knew all the disadvantages. And was very receptive when we were done, but I think we need to get that word out to the realtors when this decision is made, that sidewalks are no longer anything but a positive in the city.
I agree with you, though. It's not fair to those who've complied already to now suddenly be told, oh, sorry, you didn't really have to do that, especially with a $10,000 investment.
Yeah,
So,
nor will it be unfair to the people for the last decade who've had to pay, but there has to be a
You
cutoff
have to draw the
sometime.
lines.
Yeah.
Have to draw the line somewhere, but I just can't see making these
So
people.
Jim says about 15 to 20 residents have addressed their notice since we sent them out last year. So that would probably be $40,000 worth or something like that.
Yeah, and if we're gonna be doing it, if the plans are to do it, then that's part of the expense of stormwater management for this year. That's all.
What about the individuals that the notices have gone out in prior years and they just don't do anything? I mean,
Well, I think they do it. They get
Yeah, we-
cited if they,
Okay,
we
so-
follow up
Or
with
we
it.
abate them.
Okay, we
Often
abate
We
them,
give
all
them
right.
several notices, and then if they didn't do it, we abated it and sent them.
Right, we put
And
it
that
in
goes
the
on the
property
tax.
6 or
assessment.
7,
Okay.
we were doing 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
On the
It's a
tax-
painful
on the
process.
tax-
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
this,
so look forward to this day.
yeah, this will be great for staff. This is,
Yeah.
and also, I don't know how many elected officials over the years, but many have been contacted about this is
Sidewalks.
unfair, yeah. Well, we especially had the problem that we finally took over when street trees that we
Yeah.
put in were causing
That
the
was a whole
problems.
battle, yeah.
So we finally took them over.
So it sounds like we should send notices of,
Yes, we're
rescind the
sending, yes,
ones.
absolutely.
And
Okay.
tell everybody to stop working. If this is what you're telling us, everybody's, no one do any more work, and then we'll take it over, sorry. Joe.
Now, listen, when you send those out, we need to address what we just discussed, reimbursement issues. I would at least put in there that let them know that if they have done it, will they please forward to the city a receipt showing what they paid for it? Because if we don't put that in there, you don't know necessarily who did it and didn't do it, and the last thing I need is people who've already spent the money just getting a notice saying, by the way, don't worry about it, we're gonna do it from now on. They'll be raising, so if we put in there to send the receipt in, so we can talk about reimbursement during this next fiscal year, we can make it clear that, you know, what time frame we're looking at, that the council's done that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, everything sounds good.
Timing of the bills, is there any particular comments on
Nah, I
that?
think October is yeah.
Just one question. For the average property owner, you know, when they do make modifications to stormwater management, you know, channeling drains, building rain gardens and that type of thing, how long you think they can expect to wait before they see some kind of an adjustment? I mean, how are we going to do that? Is that through?
I would say what they're gonna do is they're gonna contact us and say that they wanna do this. They would do the work, and working with the Soil Conservation Service will even help fund it to a certain extent as part of this program. And once it's in place, then we'll reduce their bill accordingly. No one's bill will go to zero, but it'll get reduced if they have stormwater management on their property.
Okay, so we'll have
So I would
that.
hopefully it'd be fairly quickly. It just depends how many we get slammed with. And how many- Yeah, one billing cycle.
Yeah.
That's a good answer, yeah.
Okay.
And then for the bigger commercial ones, we have another incentive program that sets aside, I think, $250,000 where we would help them build stormwater facilities as well to lower their fees as well. That's built into the program, into the fee.
That would also apply to like large nonprofits like churches with immense parking lots.
It could, yeah. What we're trying to do is, we got 20% of the impervious area in the city we gotta treat or eliminate. We can't do that. The city cannot do that by ourselves. We need private partners to do that. So if a church, for example, wanted to build a stormwater facility, it's in our best interest to help them make that happen, because that reduces the 20% from us. So that's the idea behind the incentive program.
Good.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
all right, thank you all. Okay.
All right, State of Maryland request for comment, low-income housing tax credit application for Alexander House.
Should have been finished or it's still,
Maybe it's just temporary.
but I'm not sure, it's been there a while. And that was a recently paved street though.
Okay.
And that was in the last couple of years.
Okay, we'll check it out. I'll let you know.
So that townhouse there, you can do
Good afternoon. Here today with representatives from the NHP Foundation. The Department of Community and Economic Development has worked with the NHP Foundation recently on some grant application and program funding through some of our city incentive programs. And then we had also recently just received a notice from the state of Maryland requesting comment for a low-income housing tax credit application for the Alexander House project. So with that relationship, we reached out to the NHP Foundation staff and requested that they be present tonight for a discussion with the mayor and city council on the Alexander House project, and then give the mayor and council an opportunity to maybe ask these gentlemen any questions that you may have on that project and the relevant funding through the low-income housing tax credit program. And with that, I'm just going to introduce these gentlemen. This is Scott Barkan, Mr. Steve Green, and Mr. Fred Mitchell with the NHP Foundation, and they're going to maybe tell you a little bit about themselves and the NHP Foundation, and then also have a PowerPoint presentation on the Alexander House project. So, gentlemen.
Actually, I'll turn it over to Steve. The one thing I will mention is that I did bring hard copies of the PowerPoint presentation. They're sitting over on the desk.
Thank you, Donna.
Well, good evening. I'm Steve Green, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Investment Officer for the NHP Foundation. We're a nonprofit housing development company. Nationally, we own about 9,500 units across 16 states in the District of Columbia. We have offices in DC and New York and Chicago and soon to be Baltimore and Houston. We are an active developer of affordable and mixed income housing. We've been around for 30 years. As I pointed out, we've developed almost 18,000 units in that period of time. So we've we're again honored to be here. We're happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be working in the corporation of Hagerstown, the city of Hagerstown. That's the next We do specialize in a lot of preservation work. This is a property in, just as an example of it, is a property in Chicago called the Mark Twain Hotel. And this one's was fully occupied. We relocated all the folks out temporarily and basically gutted the building out and rebuilt it from the inside out. It's a great old, it was a not dissimilar in age and use as the Alexander House Apartments. So it's just recently been finished. We're moving all of the folks back into the building. We're in the process of doing that. And working with the Chicago Housing Authority on the resident, getting them certified, et cetera. But we do some new construction, but we've done some in DC, and we're about to do some in Houston. But most of our work is preservation of existing developments. Really trying to go in and taking old, tired properties that need a capital investment, and we try to really work to improve the quality of the property and improve the community of the property. Fred is in charge of asset management and does a tremendous job working with our property managers in really making the place a better residential community. We don't property manage any properties. We hire local property managers. His staff spend an enormous amount of time working with those property managers to work with the community that we're a part of. It's an important part of our mission. We think it's also good, it's just good business to do that. So, yes. Let's just get a history of Alexander House.
So, as many of you know, the NHP Foundation purchased Alexander House in 2015. At that time, we had the plan to recapitalize the property through low-income housing tax credits, along with some other debt and with historic tax credits, and embark on a complete rehabilitation of the property. For a variety of reasons, we've hit some roadblocks along the way. One of them was we were not awarded the amount of historic credits that we needed. So the property, unfortunately, has lingered since then. As Steve mentioned, I mean, we did bring in new management, and we've tried to improve what we could while we've been owning the property, but this property was a great candidate, and our plan was to renovate the property soon after purchase. That did not come to fruition, so we've been spending the time since trying to put the package back together and jumpstart the renovation, along with looking at other options. But that brings us, where we are today. The property is occupied by low-income seniors and disabled folks. There is 100% Section 8 project-based HAP contract on the property, which runs through another 25 years. So, I'm sorry, another 15 years, 2034. So it will remain, it will remain serving the low-income population in the area. We provide resident services at the property, meaning not only activities and things like that, but we bring in outside services for the residents that need it. We try to be a conduit for those services. The one thing that I would like to say is right now the population of the property is predominantly very, very low income. Under the Section 8, we have to lease to people below 80% with the tax credits, 80% of the local area median income. Under the tax credits, that will be limited to 60. The majority of our residents are at or below 30% of the area median income. Although we will be bound by the HAP contract, we do feel like an improved property will attract people in the higher tranches of that income. Seniors who now would want to live in a rejuvenated downtown and move into a renovated apartment and things like that. So we are optimistic that while we'll still be bound by the low-income population due to the HAP contract, within that range, we will get people in the higher end of that range.
We should note that what we're doing is we've, working with the state of Maryland in the 4% bond program. So this is not the competitive 9%, but rather the 4% program that, where they issue a bond and comes with that, the 4% low-income tax credits. It's a program the state works every year. They have an allocation of bond. We've done, how many? We've got 4 projects in front of the state now doing this. It's a program they run pretty well, and it's pretty much available. If you can make the numbers work, it's pretty much available to you.
Which is in essence why we're here before you today, which is the first step in that application process with the state. So we put in an application and we ask the local jurisdiction if there are any comments about that project. So we're happy to answer any questions you have. But before we get into those details, we thought it'd be interesting for you all to talk a little bit about our planned rehabilitation. We put together what we think is a very strong team to help us work through the design and engineering and eventual construction of what's a very complicated old building. So we have Quinn Evans Architects based in Baltimore, Southway Builders also based in Baltimore, Triad Engineering is a local civil engineering firm, Pando is based here in the state. We have a strong team that helped us develop our plans. Our current schedule is to close the financing and start construction by the end of this summer. We estimate it's going to be a 16, 18-month construction period, so that brings us through early 2022. And as part of the renovation, I'll get into more details about this in a second, is the renovation of the retail space on the first floor. Most of our work is going to be spent on the apartment buildings and improving the community that's there. The building is 90 years old or so. There was a renovation 40 years ago when it first turned from a vacant building into an affordable housing project, and it's just tired and needs some loving, and that's what we are here to give it. So we plan on replacing the mechanical systems and improving it immensely with an energy efficient system. So all those air conditioning units you see in the windows will go away once we have a new modern efficient mechanical system involved. We're going to be the windows, replacing all of the windows so that residents can open up their windows and the air conditioning units don't fall out anymore, right? I mean, so that we'll be able to have fresh air into the building. We're hoping to renovate all of the kitchens and bring in new appliances. If they haven't been replaced in the past 10 years, we're going to give them new appliances, new countertops, new cabinets, new flooring. It's going to be a significant, substantial rehab and an improvement in the space there. In order to do this, we're going to have to be moving all the residents out for a couple months at a time. We're planning on starting at the top of the building, working our way down 2 to 3 floors at a time. So people will be out for a couple of months during the renovation. We're also going to be fully upgrading the fire sprinkler system, the alarm system, all the plumbing, energy efficient plumbing. So a lot of those improvements. I think on the next slide, we have some of the highlights of the work that we're planning on doing to the exterior. I mentioned the windows, new storefronts, new roof upstairs. There are going to be masonry repairs and cleaning in order to improve just the historic look of the old building. So some significant repairs to the exterior of the building. And all of those repairs on the exterior, and a lot of them on the inside, are all done with an eye towards historic rehabilitation. As Fred mentioned, we are going after historic tax credits. These are federal historic tax credits, not the state of Maryland historic tax credits. Fred mentioned we tried to apply for the state of Maryland's tax credits. but we're not competitive in their funding rounds. They have a relatively limited amount of those tax credits. We weren't successful in those in 2 application process, but we are going after the federal historic tax credits. So as I mentioned, part of our renovation is also improving, particularly a focus on the retail spaces along the plaza and improving those spaces, making them essentially warm lit shells, white shell space with new energy efficient mechanical systems, electricity, plumbing to the bathrooms, so that a tenant can come in and lease new space. And that's one of our main goals, and with the city of Hagerstown's help, and the Invest Hagerstown grant helps tremendously, and you'll be able to convert those spaces and make them available to local businesses.
Let me just add a comment that while we've been owning this property since we purchased it, we have been trying to lease that retail space, but we've kind of been handcuffed in that the space isn't really leasable in its current condition. And so we were caught between a rock and a hard place, not knowing what we were going to be doing with the renovation. We didn't have the funds to bring those spaces up to, as Scott said, a warm shell. We've had a few small tenants. We have Cape and Blade Barbershop in. We did have a photography studio who didn't last, but the fact that we haven't had a lot of leasing activity is partly attributable to the fact that the spaces aren't leasable at the moment, and we couldn't bring them up to that condition without knowing what the full renovation was going to be.
I already talked about the historic renovation that we're excited about, so we're going to move to the facade. My final slide here, just thought this might be helpful to sort of see an overall budget. Well, it's about a $27.3 million renovation. The vast majority of that is going to be spent on the construction costs. We have typical soft costs, the acquisition costs, but the main focus here will be on the construction costs. The sources, which Steve mentioned a little bit already, is largely going to be relying on the state's tax-exempt bond program and low-income housing tax credits and historic tax credits. And so that private debt line that you see at the top is the permanent debt. That's tax-exempt bonds issued by the state of Maryland. They're 40-year bonds through their HUD risk share program. And what we're in for an application now, these are non-competitive bonds in the state of Maryland. Just in the same way the city and other jurisdictions around the state get tax-exempt bonds, affordable housing is public purchase that also qualifies for those public bonds. And from the public bonds comes the low-income housing tax credits. And that you see on that investor equity. We actually bring in an equity investor that purchases those low-income housing tax credits. They also purchase those federal historic tax credits that I mentioned. They become part of the ownership group and provide equity for the project. So this is just a high-level summary. Of course, happy to answer more questions that you might have about our sources or uses on the project.
I have a question. Getting back to this particular chart that I'm interested in, especially as it relates to some of those final comments. So the private debt is $6.7 million of tax-exempt bond financing, which is issued via the state, which you as an entity are eligible for, correct?
Correct.
Much like a local government would be eligible for a tax-exempt bond for a public purpose. And the investor equity of $10 million isn't required to be, this is an assumption I'm trying to clarify, is not required or obligated to be a nonprofit. They can be a for-profit entity.
It typically is a for-profit.
Right.
In this day and age, it's typically a financial institution.
They're the partner that are loaning their money to make the money off of the project that you're attempting to generate that revenue for in that partnership as part and parcel to the credits and bond financing
Yeah, they make their money.
opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, they make their money
Right.
from the tax credits, the credits against their federal income tax liability.
They're purchasing the tax credits
Essentially,
for
yes,
use.
correct, exactly right.
And they're not loaning the money,
They're
they're actually investing.
buying, yeah.
Right.
And they don't get.
Well, the
they don't
return on
really-
that investment in this market is markedly better than going and putting it in a CD or something.
That, yeah. no,
Right.
They
I
get the
mean-
credits against their tax liability. So,
Right.
you know, it's all internal to them as to what their return is, but it's definitely
So-
better than 2 or 3%, which.
So getting back to the 6.7 million, which is the tax exempt bond component, what you're saying is that that this type of project would need to be of a public housing nature in order to qualify for that tax exempt status?
It's public housing, but affordable housing. Yeah, there's a difference between public
I thought
housing.
you used the word public purpose.
It's a public purpose, just like a
Right.
park would be, a hospital would qualify for tax
So-
exempt bonds, and so does affordable housing.
It's under the
even those are-
It's called the Private Activity Bond Program. So the federal government says that there are certain private activities, so it isn't actually a
Of
public
for-profit
purpose.
partners.
It can be, there's a private activity bond, so it's a bond, it's a tax exempt bond that is used for a private purpose, okay? And so that can be, and states use it for educational purposes, private educational purposes.
Right.
They don't typically use it for public, you know, for the building like this University of Maryland. They use it, a private university could access it if they wanted. In this case, most states use this program for, a majority of it for the purposes of developing and preserving affordable housing. A lot is, because for others, you know, well, I won't get into it.
So,
You
I
can-
guess of these funding partners, I'm trying to identify the party that typically is the entity that sort of walks away, if you will, at the end of things, with that profitable component. I mean, you stated at the beginning, you're the not-for-profit
Right.
arm of this partnership, and the exercise to complete this project. There has to be a party in this group of partners that will be the party that gets to achieve some sort of profit. Otherwise, nobody's going to do it, right?
Well, the investor who buys the tax credits gets a return based upon
They're gonna
the
make money.
allocation of credits. It has nothing to do with the performance of the real estate.
But they're gonna make money.
Yeah, that's what, you
Okay.
could say that.
They're gonna spend less money on taxes.
Yeah,
by-
which in their view is making money.
Okay.
But they're not making money from the real estate, from
Right.
the operation of the real estate. That Nobody's
Nobody
really
would
gonna
do
make a
that.
lot of money from the
I
operation
understand
of
that.
the
Nobody
real
would do it if
estate.
that were the case.
Yeah. We
Um,
barely, you know, the operations will basically break even every year.
On this property.
So
Yeah, most properties.
here's the concern I have. We, as a local community, we've invested tens of millions of dollars in this area of the community. We had the same conversation with Mr. Carmichael, not some 4 or 5 years ago now. To secure sustainable improvements to the condition of the community, and expand that capability. And what I hear, when I try to boil down the proposal, right now, the property is locked into a Section 8 program that is set to extend through 2034 at 80% of the median average income level, right? And I realize, for all intents and purposes, it's likely not achieving that number, partly probably because of the makeup of the style of the units and the location and type and condition and age, et cetera. What we're being asked to comment on is whether we want to support a proposal by a private nonprofit entity that wants to work with a for-profit partner that's going to achieve some direct financial benefit from that, to lower that bar even further for how many years? Another 20 or 30 years?
I don't think we're gonna lower the bar, we're gonna we.
If you're going from 80 to 60, that's lowering the bar, right?
Well, the existing occupancy that that was there, it's been there when we acquired the property. It's not gonna lower that, we'll probably raise it from what the current occupancy is over time. But it's, we acquired the property, it was fully occupied.
Right. But it's going from 80% to 60%. That's what we're locking the future.
It's not currently.
that property
I'm just trying to
into.
clarify that the current occupancy.
I hear that. I
Okay, so we're not
understand that.
lowering it. We're probably raising the median, we hope to raise the median income level slightly from the current occupancy.
The current is at 60%?
The
or
current
80%?
is,
Is 80%
No,
by
no.
the HAP contract, I know. But the actual occupants,
Yeah.
the vast majority, 75%, 75 out of 95 units is below 50% right now.
So my question, I guess I'm trying to figure out is why would we invest the magnitude of funds that we have as governmental partners in improving the conditions of the community, only to turn around and support a project that doesn't head in that same metric goal?
Because as I mentioned earlier, effectively, it will, because a better property will attract people closer to that 60% than we attract now. Right now, we get the lowest of the low income wanting to live there.
Because we're hedging that over the next 40 years, we're being locked into this, that won't happen on its own, right?
The condition of that property. it
We're
will
hedging
not-
that.
The condition of the property is such that it attracts the lower income levels. And we think that by virtue of investment in the property and better management and hopefully creating some retail, that will actually attract a better quality resident.
And I'm just wondering if that was the same premise that was hedged back in 1978, when that same sort of lock-in process and thought and approach was taken.
I can't speak to it. I do think it was vacant at the time.
It was from 71 to 78.
Yeah, it was vacant at the time, but that was a long time ago. It's hard to calculate what was their thinking.
Will, and I think we've asked this question on a number of other projects. By the way, I was curious why the letter's dated December 19th says we have 45 days to respond, but it's stamp dated February 3rd as received. I mean, I don't get that at all. 'Cause
I wasn't given a good answer, but was told we had till the end of the month and it would still be
Right.
accepted.
I mean, we're almost 45 days in before we even see the letter. Which to me is fairly convenient. And so I think we've asked this question on a number of other projects, and I remember this discussion. So the commercial component, once it flipped back in 13 or 15, the pilot that we created at its inception in 78, which I don't think included the words disabled, by the way. I think it only included the word senior. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was just senior.
Pretty sure you're right.
That was the premise that was established, even though the memo we have here says that it included disabled residents. I don't believe that was the original premise of this. And I believe that was the premise Mr. Carmichael tried to get back to before, selling and moving on, apparently. So, what will the taxable construct of this property look like if this were to proceed? Because this is a rental. It is structured in a specific manner in the state as it applies to, assessable amount. And we just had this conversation on another housing development that wants to place, 220, 60%, average median income, because apparently that's all this community can attract into our community. And we're going to get taxes, we'll lose over the course of that time, I estimate $9 million $9 million what we're gonna lose on that particular project. I'm trying to figure out, as other parties are gonna walk away with a financial gain, what we as a governmental body, which are gonna be the ones sitting here providing all the services, are going to lose on this opportunity.
Do we pay full taxes? We,
Currently, I do believe you pay full tax.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
So when it goes from 80 to 60, are we based right now on that 80, or are we based on the market?
It's great, good question.
I don't know that, because if you say, hey, look, we're at 80% threshold right now, and that's what the threshold is, because I know there's a number out there, you can pull it up, and you can say, okay, the 80% number in this community is $952 a month in rent, and then the state does that tax calculation. Will that number drop to $780? Because at 995 units, that
And
may.
will they
Well, let
reclassify
me
the
explain,
parcel
the,
from commercial to whatever?
But Mr. Alshire, let me explain that with the Section 8 HAP contract, the rents are set
I get that.
at or above fair market rents. So regardless of what the tenants pay, that rent doesn't change, so the revenue doesn't drop when it goes from 80 to 60.
I understand. What you're saying is it's based on that HAP program, which is the 80%.
Yes, sir.
What I'm asking is if that's a base number now, is the base number going to change? I'm not saying as it applies to what you're getting. What I'm saying is if they take that number at the 80% threshold for each unit, according to that program, will that number change on a per-unit basis under this additional program, which
No, there will be
further
no change.
constricts?
No, it will not.
There will be
that
no
figure.
change. There will not be any change.
So if it's taxed at $850 a unit right now,
Right.
to come up with that assessable number,
Correct.
it's still gonna be taxed at $850 a unit,
Yes, sir.
even though now you're no longer gonna be allowed to take those tenants that are in a 60 to 80% of average median income threshold.
Correct, because those contract rents are set, and then as the residents. Those rents are set. So in your example, the $850 per unit rent, that's set, and that's the revenue we will collect. We will collect a portion from the resident, and the rest will be made up by HUD under the contract.
Let me ask it this way.
Okay?
Let's say that on average, across the board, all 95 units right now, we're in the 78% threshold, okay? Let's say that the average was 78%, okay? And let's say you renovate this property. You gotta kick out everybody because they're all at 78%, right? And then you gotta bring in an entirely new 95 renters because they're not at the 78%.
We're not doing that.
Let me finish. But let's say that let's say you gotta bring in an entire new set because they're below, because they gotta be below that 60%, right? In a perfect world. What I'm saying is, would that change the number?
No.
Because now they're not at 850, they're at 700.
What they're paying, but the HAP contract with HUD will stay at 850. So the total revenue we'll collect on each unit will be 850, some from the residents and the rest from HUD, just as it is now. It will not change that formula. So the rents, the revenue per unit will stay the same, or even go up as our HAP contract increases. We do annual increases on the HAP contract, which are typically increased by cost of living. So that will only increase.
Okay. I think I understand. So you've already bought the property, and that's the 5.7 in acquisition, right?
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Which is the 6.7 in the private debt, I'm assuming.
It's not really when when you do the bonds, I mean, there's not a direct correlation between your uses and the sources. But ultimately, it's a fair assumption that, you gotta add all the equity and the investment from the state and the historic tax credit.
And developer equity comes from NHP. Is that your funding?
That's right, that's a combination of a bunch of things.
I mean, I understand what you're trying to do. But I hope you can certainly appreciate that the city of Hagerstown is second only to Baltimore City in the state of Maryland. We have 4 to 8 times the sheer number of units within this corporate limits in this, comparable types of programs compared to our neighbors such as Frederick and Salisbury and just about every other comparable city of size in the state of Maryland. And in I think out of 10,000, roughly 10,000 units in the city of Hagerstown, 5,300, I think that's the number, 5,300 are of some form of rental assistance. And when we look at these opportunities to then lock this community into another 4 decades of that condition, you know, our citizens, I think, you know, question what that, you know, what the benefit of that direction is versus providing the opportunity for properties like this to fare on the market at some point.
We appreciate that, and I do understand the city bears what might be considered as many as some other comparable cities, bigger and smaller, bear a disproportionate amount of the cost of affordable housing, and we run into that often and are sympathetic to it. What we're trying to do is acquire an existing property that has a long-term contract on it already and improve it and make it a better part of the community. We have a history of doing that, and think that it's, you know, a benefit to the city to really just make this, to, you know, and renovate it, make it a more attractive place, invest in the retail, make the retail a better part of the community. Certainly, it's a great street corner. Go back to that picture. I thought one of the interesting things about this building is the entrance used to be around in the front there, and I imagine it was quite a nice hotel back in, you know, 1890. Well, I mean, 27. I see I think it was built, you know, as those cars were just becoming popular. But it was, I'm sure it was quite a nice hotel, and
Well, it was a place to go back in the day.
that, yeah.
Yeah, people went in there with their gowns.
Yeah, and hats, and I bet it was quite a place. Yeah, so,
30s, 40s, but
yeah. So that's our goal, it's an existing project where I hear you about increasing the supply. I mean, cities wrestle with that issue. I spent many years working in the city of New Haven, Connecticut, and it bore 15% of the affordable housing in the area, and it had the same issue. And it was a hard issue to argue when you're trying to produce new units. But this is a preservation of an existing property, then I think it's gonna generate the same tax revenue. And we think our effort here will be an asset to the community as opposed to something.
Are you looking at plans during the rehab to create more outdoor space for the residents that I think right now rely pretty much on the square to be able to get any type of fresh air?
Well, no, yes, that they have to go on the square to get fresh
Yeah,
air.
there's no place, it's built to the property
Okay.
line. So what we are doing is improving some of the spaces interior to try to, and invest in a resident service program where we create activities and reasons for people to participate and have, and to use the public spaces, of which there are a fair amount in the building. But there's just no outdoor area really to put.
no place for them to go smoke a cigarette.
Well, that is in fact one of the problems, because the problem, you know, is that, you know, we get caught in this all, you know, regularly. You don't want to have a smoking building. It's difficult, you know, particularly in a rental, because people don't like other people. So where do they have to go outside to smoke? I was saying earlier, I think we just ought to outlaw cigarettes, so, you know, we don't have the problem. They're not good for you. They've been known to kill people, but I know you can't. But that is, in fact, you're right. That's what folks are doing. We encourage health. We have 3 sort of tenets of our resident service program. It's health, it's financial literacy, and in this, it doesn't really apply too much here, but education. A lot of the family properties we operate as education. Certainly, we like to promote health programs, encourage people. We have some quit smoking programs, but that's, it's in fact, people go out there to smoke.
So that, I'm sorry, Chris. I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
this part of the building right here,
Yeah,
is that part of your,
it's an odd little space.
no opportunity for a rooftop patio or anything there for?
I'll let Scott address that. Part of, let me just say, I mean, and trust us, from the day we bought the building, we've been aware of this issue of our residents being out on the square. And we've been trying to address it in a variety of ways, as Steve mentioned. And we looked at putting a deck there. Part of the issue there is federal regulations with regards to smoking is they have to be so far from any other residential space. And if we're gonna have windows that open, there are units on the back side of that would be right above the smoking area. So, we've been looking at a lot of options, but so far, unfortunately, we haven't been able to come up with anything because that square, as you know, that's public property. As Steve said, we're right up to the property line, so we can't fence it off. We can't, control that space from the resident, from the public.
I have a question, and I don't care. I mean, I don't care about the 8 people that sit out, and I don't care if they sit out 24 hours a day, the 8 or 9 people that sit out and smoke a cigarette. They're not breaking any law. They're not harming anybody but themselves. Here's my concern, is who will be the managing entity directly involved with the vetting of resident intake? And maybe even a bigger concern is, will that process be comparable to an entity like the Hagerstown Housing Authority? So right now, it's in the Section 8 program, which I believe goes through the Housing Authority, right? They administer that program. Will it sort of leave that current program construct and become something else once it goes from the 80 to the 60 format?
I mean, the Section 8 program has contract administrators. And in this case, the Housing Authority, I don't believe, is the contract administrator. It's a complicated world in managing a Section 8 contract. They manage the Section 8 voucher program.
Right.
But in many cases where there are project-based contracts, they aren't administered by the local housing authority.
And
There are
they won't come in and do your inspections and do all that.
That's correct. That's
So
correct.
that's my
So
question,
the
who's
residents-
vetting?
So I'll get to that.
Okay.
The tenant selection process is not currently done by the housing authority. It is what's called a site-based waiting list. And this man, who has many years of experience, and as I mentioned before, I can show you examples of some, well, he's got the gray hair, or the lack of hair. But they've done a very good job of vetting residents. So the property management company that is employed to operate the property, working with Fred and his staff, are responsible for the vetting of the individuals who apply to the property to live there. There is, and Fred can explain it, there's a criminal background check, there is
Landlord check.
there's a landlord check, there's a financial check. But the process, I can't speak to who and how that was done under the previous ownership, but we can speak to how we do it, and Fred is directly involved.
Now, if I'm, in reading into your question, there's a concern about the amount of disabled there, especially mentally disabled.
No.
No? Okay, I didn't mean to assume, but,
Criminal background.
criminal background, people are
Which could incorporate mental.
fully vetted criminal background checks. And now we're dealing with, and that's been in place since we bought the property. A full background check and obviously dealing with low-income residents, some type of credit issue or a bad check or something. We have to allow that or we wouldn't be approving anyone. But any kind of violent criminal background, any kind of sexual criminal background, any kind of drug offenses, all of those are disqualifiers. And from your question there, I mean, we mirror the housing authority's screening.
That was my question.
Yes, but they don't administer it, but we mirror that.
We generally have a little more, I mean, I can't
Little bit
speak
more
to, to most housing authorities, our occupancy requirements are stricter than the average housing authority.
And that's-
That's for sure. You also, there's usually very little turnover at a property like this. I don't know what the turnover is here, but I know it's very little because we've talked about it. I can't
Less than
cite,
15%.
I can't cite the statistic.
Does the HAP contract, does it specify a percentage disabled, percentage senior?
It's just on, HUD,
One or the other?
HUD years ago decided in their wisdom that, elderly, that disabled, in order to house some percentage of the disabled population, they had decided that it would mix well with elderly. Largely because I'm guessing, I mean, I was around at the time. I think that they thought it was it was tended to be single-person occupancy, much like elderly, so physically it could work because they were only requiring one-bedroom units. I think that the most people in our business line of work think that wasn't a particularly good decision by the federal government, but it was their dictum, that it had to make it eligible to disabled folks. You get both mentally challenged disabled folks and physically. And sometimes those populations don't mix particularly well. It's a little bit of a challenge to manage. We try to, you try to do the best you can to get a more homogeneous population.
And you said, you were mentioning the background checks that you
Yes, sir.
do before you grant that tenant a right to.
Yes, sir.
What about subsequent violations?
We are very strict as far as lease violations. And it's usually, it's a one strike and you're out. Obviously, we are dependent upon the courts, and courts are often very reticent to put someone who is a senior or someone who is disabled out of their apartment. So unfortunately, it can be a long process or several chances. But we are very strict about serious lease violations. If you're caught dealing drugs or, if there's violence and you have a tendency towards violence to your neighbor or people in the lobby or things like that, no tolerance. But again, all we can do is bring them to court, and then we have to go.
Well, as you say,
we're
if you-
dependent upon the judge.
If it's the second or third time, it tends to be a pattern, so you have to start the process,
I understand.
Correct.
And I assume this property would be under the same obligations that every other rental is.
Any other questions?
Thank you, thanks for the information, Bill.
All right, next up is the loan portfolio update.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ashley Newcomer, Business and Community Development Finance Specialist. It's been a while, so I just wanted to come and update you on our loan portfolio. Great, everyone has their copy there. Right now, our loan portfolio stands at a little over 3.3 million. Of that, the majority in both number and dollar amount are active loans. 47 of those, a little over 2.2 million. We also have 37 deferred loans, and I'll get into kind of why deferred in our coming slides. 903,000. Also, of that, we do have $185,459 worth of delinquent loans. I will say, of those delinquent loans, all were made prior to 2010. Of those, they really are 3 loans, 2 of which are substantial and 1 smaller one. But we have worked with our city attorney to try various collection methods. On our next slide, in terms of loan type, our largest loan balance is with our business revolving loans. We have 14 of those, $1.1 million. Our next balance that I talked about, the deferred, those include both single-family and public facility loans. We have 37 of those. The reason for deferred, and of those, I will say that 6 are the public facility. The majority are actually single-family. The reason for deferred is we look at affordability, and we don't want to create any unnecessary burden on our homeowners. So,
Yeah, to add to that, a lot of our deferred loans for single-family homeowners sometimes can act, it's not quite the same thing, but it acts similar to a reverse mortgage for seniors sometimes. There's some equity left in the home and for them to get needed repairs, and we don't want to burden them with loan payments, and then typically those repayments are handled at some point down the road through a property sale or handled by the estate.
Although we do have single-family loans that the homeowners do wish to make payments. So we have 14 of those with a loan balance of approximately $150,000. And then another big chunk is our community development block rental residential. So I'll get into a little bit about what each of those means and what they entail. On the next slide, our business revolving loan fund, eligible applicants include just small businesses that have annual sales of less than $2 million annually for each of the last 2 years. A number of eligible activities, however, for the most part, those that apply are looking to help with growth and expansion, rehabilitation, and facade enhancement. The maximum loan amount is $200,000 or 80% of the total project cost, whichever is less, minimum of $10,000. We do make sure that the term does not exceed 7 years. We do that just so that the revolving loan fund does truly revolve. If we make our term too long, we find that we don't have availability to lend to other new businesses. Right now, we actually do have a healthy loan availability. We have $253,389 available to lend. On the next slide, I talked a little bit about our community development block grant with rental residential rehabilitation loans. Those are low-interest loans provided to investment property owners for just general rehabilitation to rental units. This program isn't always available. It's based on the budget for each fiscal year. We do tend to gravitate towards larger projects which have repairs that bring properties up to city code standards and resolve any health or safety concerns. With these properties, if they're fully occupied at the time of application, at least 51% of the units must be occupied by households who meet our community development block grant income guidelines. If they are not fully occupied, then it would require that the investment property owner apply our guidelines to the first lease up. So on the next slide, we also have our single-family rehabilitation loans. These help to, for a lot of cases, we repair a lot of roofs, porches, window replacement, hot water heater. We do this, sometimes homeowners come to us just of their own need. Other times they've received code violations. So with those, they are low-interest loans. Again, they do have to meet our income limits. Now, mind you, these are for non-emergency home repairs. I highlight that just because we do also offer what are called our emergency repair grants, which, say for instance, someone doesn't have heat in the middle of winter, or say is unable to shower due to a broken hot water heater. We do have emergency repair grants of up to $5,000. So some people just qualify for the grant. Some have additional work that doesn't qualify as an emergency, which where our rehabilitation loans come into play and can be used in conjunction with. So if you see there, you can see, so for a household of four, they must have a gross annual income of less than $60,250. So that's kind of a little bit of a guide there. A few recent highlights. We have had 4 new business revolving loans totaling little under $500,000. We've had 1 new rental residential rehab loan of $150,000 for renovation at 254 South Locust Street. We've had no additional delinquencies, which we are pleased with, definitely, and 1 delinquent, yes, knock on wood, 1 delinquent account paid off in full, and then multiple single-family rehab loan projects either completed or in process. I'd say right now we have about 12 that are in some form, whether we're working with the homeowner to develop a scope of work, or they're in the process of getting contractor quotes, somewhere in the process, or the work's being completed, but there. As for our new business revolving loans, I'll just highlight 4 that we've had recently. The Schmankel Stube, $200,000 that were provided for renovations to the restaurant. Regenerate Float Center, they have renovations to their new location at 5 Nottingham Road. That was $186,400. We also had Junk Works Antiques. We helped with the acquisition of their new location at 125 East Baltimore Street, and they also received $25,000 for working capital. As well as we had a business, MB3 Packaging Corporation. We gave them $30,000 for working capital. They actually relocated to Hagerstown from Jessup, Maryland, and unfortunately had a large piece of equipment damage during their shipment process. Next slide, I'll just talk very briefly about our rental residential rehabilitation loan for $150,000, which was provided to the investment property owner of 4454 South Locust Street. The financing provided both for exterior and interior renovations, do 3 duplexes with 6 units total, new vinyl siding on the exterior, and as well as a number of interior renovations. You'll see on the next slides just a few of the nice renovations that were done to these units for low to moderate income homeowners, low to moderate income renters here in our area. One positive to end here on is we did have a payoff in full of one of our delinquent business revolving loans, City Theater LLC. They had a principal balance of about $95,000, which was paid off in full in May of 18. So, any questions?
I think that the last time we received a report of this magnitude, the delinquency was at like 650,000, so I want to say congrats to staff because that number is way down.
Thank you, much
from
appreciated.
pre-work.
Yeah, we also like to thank the HLRA. Nobody from the HLRA is here this evening, but I think over the last 5 to 10 years, they've been very cognizant of concerns with delinquent loans. We've even had a business revolving loan that went to a business that unfortunately they did not succeed and went out of business, but due to the requirements, the collateral, and the vetting of that applicant, that business still makes loan payments. So we have also looked at certain loans that have been delinquent. If they're so old, we sort of shift them out of the chart. So that may be some of that number, but still keeping tabs on loans. We don't forgive them. And I think we've had that discussion before. We definitely do not forgive them, and they're still obligated, and we still work with the city attorney at times to enter judgments or do whatever we can within reason to hopefully one day at some point collect on those.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up is,
Mayor's item.
yeah, review materials related to reproductive health.
So during the last regular session, there was some materials passed out regarding ordinances related to various issues regarding reproductive health. It was asked to be put on the agenda to discuss, and you should all have copies of the materials that were passed out at that time.
So before, because, look, this group of individuals has been before the mayor and council on a number of occasions, and they've asked us what I feel are two fairly specific questions and requests. The one we have here, the other one I don't see, and so I want to understand that a little better. The first one they have asked is the entity that provides the service now. I think the statement has been made by a number of the individuals within that group, is not accredited or
Currently
associated.
licensed, their
Yeah,
license expired.
and so I'm not in the medical field, I don't know what that means, and so, I don't know, one, whether we're supposed to have any involvement of that nature with that type of service. In other words, do we require that or have that condition of other medical providers, in the community that operate a medical business? And if we don't, why would we apply one to another? And I think that then opens up that Pandora's box of, you're gonna hear from other medical providers in the community that would have opinions on that matter. Much better versed and much more educated in that field than we are as a body. So I don't know if we can figure that out at some point.
There's the
Maryland
entire
Licensing
medical
Commission
board.
takes care of
Yeah,
that.
that's not.
And I have no doubt whatsoever that they were contacted
Okay.
long before we were.
So that issue's moot. We can say, hey, we've directed your concern to entity X to handle. That's response to that particular request from that group.
To the licensing, yeah.
Okay. All right. And then the second one, obviously, is this resolution, which they have requested the mayor and council consider passing. I equate this to frankly, any number of federal, debated items, whether it's, gun rights folks asking us to, allow everybody to open carry, or conceal carry in the city of Hagerstown and make it some sanctuary, or the illegal immigration, issue. Any number of those items that are obviously passionate among folks, as they apply to federal law. And just me, this is just my 2 cents on this particular item. I think I would say to this body the same thing I said as it applied to the marijuana growing is, federal law is the law of the land, and that's the law that I respect because that's the oath that I took. And so I wouldn't support this resolution any more than I would, opposition to any one of those others.
Well, my understanding,
opposed.
and Lou can probably answer this question, we as a body, to produce an ordinance such as this, we're preempted from doing that by a higher authority. Is that not correct?
Sure, yes, although, we could pass resolutions saying that we support this or don't support that. I want to make clear how I feel about it. I don't want to get into big constitutional arguments. I want to get into, if you ask me, do I support a woman's right to choose? Yes, I do. I do not have to say that I'm not going to address it because it's superseded by the federal Constitution. If the Constitution, if the Supreme Court says it's illegal, that's what it is. Having said that, the reason I would not support this is because I don't support what they are requesting. I support a woman's right to choose. I want to say a couple things. I'm glad this was put on for a work session because citizen comments, we've clearly decided forever is not a time for discourse between the citizens and the council. It's a time for citizens to come and address the mayor and council and what they want. It is not a time for us to respond and get into a debate.
Right.
And therefore, I have made a point not to address these things in council comments, because that just invites the very thing that we say we don't allow. I want to make a couple things perfectly clear. I have total respect for the folks that are showing up here and saying what they are saying. I understand their feelings, and I understand they are firm believers in it. The problem I have, and they mentioned it in a prior meeting, is I bring up religion, because that's what this is about. This is about religion. And quite candidly, the folks that are coming and talking to me, I don't believe in their religion. I'm sorry. I have a different religious belief than they do. And it's a very fundamental difference. I don't mean to start debating the differences between their beliefs and my belief, but I'm now 67 years old, and if somebody thinks they're going to come in here and convince me that I should change my religious beliefs, they are strongly incorrect. And those who know me, I've been a president of my synagogue, I've taught Sunday school, I would consider myself a religious person. But I don't think a lot of folks understand some of the very fundamental basic differences between Christianity and Judaism. And when I hear folks coming in and starting to tell me I should change my opinion on a civil matter because of their religious beliefs, I say to them, I have full respect for your religious beliefs, and I also understand why you're trying to convince me. But it's not going to happen. But I want to reiterate, I know some of these folks. These are fine people. They are devoted people. Throughout my lifetime, I've had very well-intentioned people trying to convince me that I should change my religious beliefs because I'm not going to go to heaven. And I'm not insulted by that, because I understand they mean that. They're looking out for me and my soul. And I understand when we got the thank you cards, they were not being sarcastic. And I understand when these folks say they are praying for us, they are not being sarcastic, they are, because that is their beliefs and that is what they believe in. And I just want to make sure they understand I respect their beliefs. I have some real difficulties with their continued method of coming in, because I don't believe that this is the appropriate forum. It is for them, because we offer a TV station. So it allows them to come in and speak to everybody else, because clearly after we say what we're going to say tonight, it should be clear that they're probably not speaking to us, unless we have some folks here that feel we should do something different. So that's what I wanted to do. I want to emphasize 2 points: my respect for these folks. I know a lot of these folks walk the walk, just not talk the talk. But they need to have as much respect for my religious beliefs as I have for theirs. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah. I also would not support these resolutions for the purpose Kristen said, also because I believe in a woman's right to choose, but they've been able to, provide a lot of statistics and things. So I just wanted to provide some actual facts about unsafe abortions. Unsafe abortions result in complications for over 7 million women a year. It's one of the leading causes of death during pregnancy, and the large majority of those unsafe abortions occur where abortion is illegal. So it is a fact, and it's shown statistically all throughout the United States, that the more restrictive the law, the higher the rate of death and complications. So while we speak about the unborn child, reversing your right to a safe abortion also puts our health at risk, women's health at risk, and I certainly wouldn't support that. Safety of abortions that are done by a doctor in the United States, major complications are rare. less than 0.25%. So it's actually safer to have an abortion by a doctor than it is to get your wisdom teeth removed. So I think the health of women is very important too. It's very important to me since I am one. And I think passing a law that would restrict abortions in our area, very clearly documented, affects the health of a community, and something I definitely would not be interested in.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I respect what Lou said. I respect what Emily said just now. My position on this is, I'm not sitting at this table as a religious person. I'm sitting at this table as a part of a governing body, which should tolerate religious freedom for all, and the ideas and the respect the opinions of everybody. What I disagree with is basically looking at the example they want us to follow of Wascom, Texas, population 1,887 people, to state that we find the Supreme Court's decision as being unconstitutional and a violation against others and all this, and to declare ourselves a sanctuary city. I will not declare us a sanctuary city for illegal aliens. I will not declare us a sanctuary city for anybody that violates the federal guidelines. And I think the place to do this is in federal court. If you don't think Roe versus Wade is correct or fair, then take it to federal court. I don't know why, personally, I'm wasting my time sitting here discussing this. So that's my opinion. So respect my opinion.
You can thank Kristen for that.
No, I think the hope was that we give an answer to folks that are asking a question over and over.
Understand.
I mean, I feel like they keep bringing in a resolution saying, hey,
Why don't
will
we
you
do
pass this? Hey, will you pass this?
And I respect, like you, I respect these people immensely. I've talked to them after the sessions where they've had some very creative ways of kind of getting around the rules that were set, which I respect that too. But, and I understand their position as you do. I understand their position of faith, and I celebrate that. But that's not what I'm here to do with the city.
Anything from you?
Nope.
Okay, let's see, let me cover this again, but real fast here. Respect what Lou said, and Austin, and Emily, and a little bit of what Kristen said. I don't feel like he does in the fact that, yes, I've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, but I've also sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution for the state of Maryland. So when it comes to medical marijuana, Maryland says it's okay. Federal government, of course, doesn't believe in it. That's fine. All right. I believe in medical marijuana. I know people who benefit from it, and I'm happy they have that choice. So I also believe in a woman's right to choose. I myself personally, I don't believe in abortion myself, but that's not on me. All right, I have my beliefs. I'm not going to put my beliefs on somebody else, and I believe that I'm not going to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. That's just how it is. So, and Lou, you're going to hell for a lot of other reasons other than your religion. All right. Having said that, I think that the city administrator wants to talk about letter of support requests.
Yeah, there are several letters of support that were requested from mayor and council that were in your boxes. I think I forwarded some of them to you. I'd just like to get, if you have any issues with any of these or want to discuss any of these out in a work session, we could do that. The first one would be a letter of support for the application by Bridge of Life for funds from the Mary Kay Bowman Fund for Historic Preservation and Fine Arts. That would go towards some work that they're doing in their building.
Yes.
Good? Delegate Quarterman has asked for letters of support regarding several House bills before the Assembly. HB 1275, the Suzanne Jones Act, relates to the inmate release issue. Anybody have any problems with that one? HB 1367, Mark Rail expansion into Western Maryland.
No problem.
HB 1485, Maryland Medical Assistance Program relating to reimbursement of emergency service transporters.
No problem with that.
And HB 1496, Medical Assistance Program, Emergency Service Transporters Reimbursement for Transportation and Medical Services.
No problem.
All right, we'll take care of drafting a letter for that, or letters for each of those. Also today, we got a couple requests from the Dolman Black Heritage Museum. The first one is offering support for a grant request from Preservation Maryland on behalf of the Dolman Black Heritage Museum. Good with that one. And another letter of support to the Maryland Heritage Area Authority for another grant application of $20,000. A letter of support for that one.
Fine.
All right. We will take care of getting all of those together and getting those out. Also, as far as the presentation tonight on the low-income housing tax credits,
What are we doing there, yeah?
thoughts on that?
I mean, you know my thoughts.
I know your thoughts.
I think that's a tough one, because the building is there and it's deteriorating. We can't make it go away. So if we can help improve it.
Yeah, I don't have any option to offer them.
Yeah.
I mean, and we also, you know, gave Invest Hagerstown.
Okay. And just one more quick thing, sorry. Just want to give a shout out to one of our own, Rick Conrad, Hagerstown Fire Department, and Mark Keller, who I think everyone around the table knows, on the putting together the tribute to a former longtime band director at South Hagerstown, Brad, oh my gosh, his name. Brad Smith, I'm sorry. And over 300 alumni of Mr. Smith gathered in South Hagerstown Gym last night. And
Y'all didn't play
basically,
music, did you?
yes, we did.
Yes.
Well, yes, they did, not me.
Usually play like the winning song for the,
Yeah.
That's right, we
football
do.
game.
The fight song of Hagerstown. But it was a great tribute to this guy. And if you get a chance to go on Friends of, I think it's the Friends of South Hagerstown Rebel Band, some of the testimonials these folks put out there about the influence this man had on their lives are just, are amazing. And unfortunately, he did pass away yesterday before he was able to see the tribute to him. I think his wife saw it. I'm not going to, make any comments on it. But regardless, it was something to see, and it really, not being a Rebel graduate myself, and Emily and Councilwoman Keller and Councilman Alshire are but being part of South Hagerstown for almost 25 years, it was just a wonderful thing to see, and really instilled a lot of pride, and I hope it's something that continues at South Hagerstown for the foreseeable future. So that's all for me, Mayor.
That's all for you. Lou?
Oh, I think I probably said enough.
Next week's meeting.
I'll try to see what I can
Thank you.
find.
Yes. Austin?
Nothing tonight.
Kristen?
I have 3 items. The first is, I was actually stopping by, was going through town to a business out the north end to drop something off my daughter on Friday, and we stopped at the Restore. And they had something that they had posted for sale, but it was gone. But anyway, this is the first time she had ever looked backwards. So every time you're leaving Jonathan Street, you're heading through the north end, and you can split there, and this is the first time she ever looked backwards, and she saw the Coca-Cola painting, and it was pretty cool, because she was like, if you ever get rid of that, I will disown you. So, I know and so I tried to explain, this is where we're looking to put in the museum, and so I don't know if that's a component of it, but, it was neat to see a 12-year-old's view of something we have seen for decades, and often don't take a second glance at, so. The second item is, I know there was I think it was a Herald Mail article, and some deliberations, I guess a presentation to the county from Delegate Parrott on the needle and I'm just gonna call it the Needle Program, because I don't know the specifics on it, and I'm sure Emily has, more detail than I do, but here's my confusion. I look back in the audience and I see that the chief is still here, and our fire chief was here earlier. And, the county has its, what I'll call comparable fire chief, and it has the sheriff. And I know that, that there was an interest in looking at a letter of support from the county, and I don't know that that request has been made of the city, to send comparable letter for, and let's just be real honest, for a program that is a countywide program that has a significant impact on the drug addiction issue as it affects the city of Hagerstown. And when I read the article and you read some of what I felt were sort of the boogeyman, components of it, and then I'm going to be murdered for saying some of this stuff, but I don't understand why we employ, and I think the worst thing we can do as politicians is not engage our professionals in the field that we employ them in to participate in those types of political decisions before making them and assuming the dynamics and the metrics of how they work. I guess for us, if we're going to be asked, and I doubt we will at this time.
We have not yet.
For that, I would want to hear from our respective chiefs, both the city and the county, in both of our public safety fields. I'd want to hear from somebody who runs CRS, who I think responds to 50% of all the EMS calls in the county, to understand, what the good and bad of such a program is. Because I'm not naive. I'm not going to sit here and say, that's 100% good for this community, or that's 100% bad. I'd want to hear from our professionals on things that are working within it before there is, and maybe I'm wrong, and I've read the article, I felt like there was sort of this attempt to just simply throw the whole thing out the window without any consultation with the professionals in the public safety service fields in our local community to address, what's good and what's bad, what works, what doesn't, how it could be better, or the improvements or things that you definitely don't want to not have. And so,
Can you try to find out facts?
I don't know,
I have some that I would like to
You've got one
provide.
more?
I do.
Okay.
So the last item is also of that nature, and I don't, I gave, you can pass it up. So I guess there was a meeting, and Paul, Delegate Quarterman gave us, I'm assuming most members a call about that, an interest from a number of folks, and an effort and bill that might be forthcoming to adjust the hotel motel tax. And I know the bill has since been dropped. I think it's House Bill 1598. And I don't know whether the list we got for letters of support came before this bill was dropped.
It did.
So I don't know if we're going to get a follow-up email to say, hey, City of Hagerstown, do you support this bill? Which, for all intents and purposes, is way closer to home, so to speak, than the other items that we're being asked to support. So I'm assuming we're going to get an email to that effect. But, when I look at this flow chart, and I think I said to Paul at the time we had that conversation, I don't have a huge sort of dog in this fight. I don't have, a great involvement. It's up to whoever those interested parties are to sell it to the hotel motel industry folks, that you're basically going to double the room rate fee in some cases. And it's up to the county folks, to decide whether that they want, this is roughly $2 million of public tax money siphoned off to a private organization to administer. because I know in the past, life as a county commissioner, folks sometimes would refer to the hotel motel tax funds that we got as a slush fund, and that's a government agency, government entity administering it that answers to the electorate. In this case, you're literally going to hand it off to a private organization that has no answer ability, so to speak, on use of those funds to the electorate because it's a private entity. And I understand the premise of sort of how it's being done, but for us, the questions I had is, and I see the chart here, but there's blanket numbers. And I would want to know if the city of Hagerstown's current portion would be reduced. I mean, I think that's a question that I would have. And then number two, the metrics of this flow chart and how it's identified to go to other things and big projects. We have things ongoing right now. We're involved in this study. And I think, Lou, you said it best when you said, people need to understand that this isn't a city project. And this flow chart just about makes it absolutely clear that this stadium thing is absolutely, under this type of scenario, not a city project. I mean, this is a private entity is gonna garner this newfound county tax money. They're going to use a state entity to bond a big project, and then they're gonna own and operate this big, they're gonna build, own, and operate this big project. I mean, that's as simple as it gets, and the city sort of, steps back and is the infrastructure partner. But down at the bottom left, you see this state of Maryland request 1/3 of project, as with similar projects in the state. I'm assuming that means from local money, and I would have questions, does that mean, what's our role in it? And I find it odd that, that the idea is created, that meetings are held among private parties, and that a bill is dropped, and that, and again, I don't have anything against it. It just seems odd that neither the city nor the county have the elected bodies have an awareness, a role in that discussion to understand the, where we fit in, especially given the fact that this isn't speaking to something that's new. It's speaking to something we're already in the midst of. We're not talking about, hey, this could be used for an item. We're in the middle of an evaluation on that one big item, which is the stadium right now. To get that far and not have that conversation just doesn't make sense to me. This indication, and again, I have nothing against Chief, but could be under a local development authority like Chief. I don't know how that relationship works, because clearly there is connectivity between the parties and partners that are moving forward with this type of proposal, and the parties and partners that would be the recipient managers of the funds through such a proposal. And all I want to do is not have to receive this type of communication through some third-party process, or you're not involved in the discussion at all, to not be able to ask very simply, how's our amount going to change? What does that mean to us? What's our role, in this particular project that's already, sort of in the works? I mean, you just want to ask those sort of simple questions, and why that opportunity, isn't presented, and again, it's on the county and those other parties to figure out, whether it's publicly appropriate, to basically delegate this newfound public tax money off to a private entity to manage, you know, and
There are authorities all over this country that look exactly like this.
I hear you.
Okay, it's not like this is abracadabra stuff, you know.
I definitely don't think it's abracadabra stuff
Okay.
at all. Not being vetted to the city and the county elected bodies for at
So you
least,
never had a conversation with Delegate Quarterman?
yes, for 2 minutes on a
Well,
phone.
You had a 2-minute longer conversation with him about it than I did, just so you know.
But, and
Okay,
I'm
that's
not
all I'm
saying
saying.
anybody has, what I'm saying is, we have certainly had greater discussion and input in the process of our state delegation, interests, you know what I mean, in taking items forward that involve us, of a much, lower magnitude than this.
Well, I'm confused on, I mean, the way this flow chart works. I'm confused of where this involves us, especially on the fourth one down where it says Hagerstown municipalities remain whole with the way we are currently when it comes to hotel motel tax. So I mean, other than that, I don't see where this
bottom
actually
left.
involves us.
The bottom left clearly says, request a third of the project as with similar project in the state. All my curiosity is, the entire time we've talked about this for the last too many years, that the third comes from the city and county, right? Third from the local, third from the private, third from the state. So clearly, that item alone, and we can't look at this chart and say, we're gonna talk about this as if we haven't had a single conversation about this ever. I mean, it literally has an emblem of the Suns here. So, you know what I mean? It's already
I
sort of
see
an
that, I
active
see a soccer
thing.
ball, I see a,
So,
whatever this thing is.
so what I'm saying is, all I want to be able to do is say, what does that mean? Where does that, I mean, we've talked nothing but the fact through this entire multi-year process that, you know, I mean, we're doing the study right now. It's not with Chief, it's not with some other entity, right? It's at the city's direction. The entire impetus up until the moment of seeing this document was that the city was gonna own this thing. Now we have a House bill introduced and a flow chart showing we're not even gonna be part of that process. All I'm saying is, it isn't as if we woke up today and said, we might do this one thing if this happens. We're already in the process of doing this thing. And this clearly changes the dynamics of the understanding of this body to date of how it would be accomplished. And if there
Okay,
is a
all right.
difference, we should have that discussion.
Okay. well,
I'm not
maybe we-
opposed to
we
it.
should. Okay, yeah, well, maybe we should have that discussion. We'll definitely do that. I mean, I want to have that discussion because I want to be able to understand, you know, how anybody at our county level, the Board of County Commissioners could be against this, considering the fact that, you know, for 20 years, they've done exactly what you pointed out, which is the county slush fund, where they've spent probably nearly $20 million over 20 years on, God only knows. And I don't think there's any accountability from them on that amount of money that they've spent. I know there's accountability when it comes to the CVB, who reports to the Board of County Commissioners, and I also know that there will be, with this entity through Chief, would also report to the county commissioners. So I think there's accountability even in this authority. But again, I would be very happy to know how it all is supposed to work and all pan out, just like you. So,
Because I got a copy of the draft bill last week, right? Well, I guess, yeah, last week.
yeah, Friday.
And I got a
Friday.
copy of this flow chart, and
I never got this,
we're in process
just so you know. You know,
of
you showed it to
doing
me.
this thing.
No, I didn't get it.
I mean, I think that as
You want me
Lou's,
to,
as Lou's put it from day one, I think we're happy to hand it off and say,
Oh, my God, yes.
have at it, do it. If you
Is
find
this-
a way to do it, here you go.
would you want me to see, because I just looked to see in the bill, there's no hearing date or anything on this bill.
I don't know.
would you like me to see if Delegate Corderman would be available to talk to you first Tuesday in March? And ask him questions about it?
We'll figure it
Okay.
out. All right.
Just
Anything else,
let me know.
Kristen? Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the harm reduction program that Kristen brought up. There hasn't been a request for support. It was me requesting a letter of support just because I felt like we needed to take a stance on this. I do believe that this isn't going to go anywhere because anyone with a brain knows that this is a bad idea. But just to correct some of the misleading statements, stop laughing at me. Just to correct some of the misleading statements that were provided to the county commissioners, because I think it's important to know the facts about harm reduction. Facts, I know, there's pesky scientific facts, but I'll forward you guys this email. This is from someone with the state that deals with this every day. Delegate Parrott said that there are only 3 programs operating. That is false. There are actually 7 jurisdictions approved and 4 more in the development phase. So, simple fact, but was false. He stated Baltimore's operated since 1994 and that they have the highest rate of bloodborne diseases in the United States. That also is false. Since the harm reduction program has been in place in Baltimore, their HIV rates have dropped from 62.8% to less than 12% over the past 10 years, and they've been on a 10-year decline. So that's false as well. Stated that it sends the wrong message that government is endorsing doing drugs. That's just simply not true. People who engage with a syringe service program even once are 4 to 5 times more likely to access treatment and 3.5 times more likely to cease injection. So that's not just a made-up fact. This is a very well-documented program that's been offered across the United States. It's about harm reduction. It's about keeping people alive until they're ready to help themselves. So just calling it a free needle exchange is just fear-mongering. That's really all it is. There was some other information given about Narcan and the exchange program. And just to talk about ours locally, it's been around for, I think, about 18 months now. There's been 455 participants. Of that 455 participants, 203 of them have been referred to treatment. That's almost 50% of people who have used the program have been referred to treatment, and 433 of them have been trained and given Narcan. Narcan being disposed in our community cuts down on calls for service as well as a lot of other things. So I had asked for the body to write a letter of support because I think it's a shame they put our health department in that position. There's a lot of really good people doing work on the harm reduction program. I do know that they are going down to discuss this with the delegation tomorrow, and I think that once people get past the fear-mongering that was done and see the actual facts and how it's beneficial to our community, maybe we won't need to write a letter of support, but if it gets to that point that it's still under fire, I would appreciate, let's be honest, the citizens that are served, a large majority of them are Hagerstown residents. It affects the health of our community, and I think, like I said, when you read facts and statistics and see the actual truth behind a program and how it is helping people, that we would all be supportive of it.
And when I said we hadn't received any emails on support or anything, I meant from the delegate
Yeah.
or a request to speak to us like the county was spoken to.
Yeah, and I know that if it got to that point where you guys wanted a presentation, I know that David Washington and Earl Stoner would have no problem coming here and discussing the real truth in their program.
Okay. Got it?
Yep.
All right. I'm not going to have anything additional because I promised Lieutenant Renner I'd be done by 6 o'clock. And it is now 6:25, so I lied to him. So we're adjourned. Thank you.